Hey guys, I was an anti-Catholic Protestant evangelical for 30 years, and I can smell Protestant vibes a mile away. And so today, I'm just going to give you my opinion and my advice, how I stay faithful to the church, even when I don't understand what the Pope is doing and why he says certain things. I got a reputation as being a Pope splainer under Pope Francis. When I started this channel, I think I was the only one. Many other people came to realize what I realized and started defending the Pope. But a lot of them have left and they're doing the same thing, the Pope Leo. So today I'm just going to give you one thing that keeps me grounded. And in fact, I had a holy priest, a good priest that early on in Pope Francis' pontificate told me Pope Francis was a good priest, a good Pope. Later told me, after he had passed away, that I stayed more faithful to the Pope than he did. He had questioned the Pope at times. So I'm just going to give you my reasoning, how I'm able to stay so firm in my faith. And it's the grace of God, but there's a few things that I think about that I'm going to share with you today. So Jesus started one church, and for 1,000 years there was one church. Then our Eastern Orthodox brothers broke away, and the main reason was the Pope. They didn't consider him the supreme pontiff like Catholics do, although they respect him as the first among equals, and they kept all their sacraments, and all their sacraments are valid. 500 years later, so 1,500 years after Christ established his church, Martin Luther breaks away. And again, he doesn't accept the Pope as the leader of the church. He dissents from the Pope, and we all see the chaos. I don't even have to explain that. 40,000 different denominations that don't even agree on the basic salvation message. But a lot of people don't realize 300 years after that, in the 1800s, a bunch of traditional Catholics, at the time they called themselves the Old Catholics, they believed in the old Catholic religion. They actually, ironically, they resisted the Catholic Church teaching when the Catholic Church changed to Latin. They kept the vernacular. So for the first 400 years, the church spoke in the vernacular, like Greek, Aramaic, or Hebrew, whatever the people could understand. And then when the world spoke mostly Latin, the church accepted that as their universal language to keep unity. Well, at that time, they refused to have Mass in Latin, but they truly broke away after Vatican I affirmed the Pope was the supreme pontiff. And again, it was over the authority of the Pope. These old Catholics broke away, led by a guy named Joseph Ignaz Zollinger. And then in the 1960s, you had Sedevacantists break away from the church, again, over the supreme pontiff. And you got guys like Mel Gibson and these other Sedevacantists like Vigano now, who believes what Mel Gibson teaches, that we haven't had a pope since 1958. So the heretics always dissent from the popes. So I look at what the heretics have done through the history, and then I look at what the saints, and I always say to myself, what would a saint do? What would the saints do? What would the heretics do? If I'm leaning more towards the heretics, I know I need to I know I need to pray for God's grace to help me to think more like the saints. So let's start early on. St. Paul. St. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 3:15, the church is the pillar of truth. The church. And what is the church? Jesus said, well, Peter, Matthew 16:18 through 19, he says to Peter, you are the rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. So we know the Pope is the leader of his church, and the gates of hell are not going to prevail. So the Pope's not going to teach error. The Pope is not going to teach heresy. This is what the church has always taught. It's 2,000 years. Then you see St. Catherine of Siena. says, even if Satan incarnate became Pope, we should not raise our head against him, but rather rest in his bosom. St. Pius X, Pope St. Pius X, in his letter to the modernist priests, scolded them because it was so cool to criticize the Pope, you know. Well, it was a very modern thing. Today, it's even more popular amongst Catholics to criticize the Pope. But Pope Pius said he was sick. He was embarrassed how people thought they could criticize the Pope. And he said, to dissent from the Pope, he said, you cannot dissent from the Pope and be holy. You cannot dissent from the Pope and be holy. A man, there was an Italian man, I used to know the story better, but you can look it up. I'll just give you the brief short of it. There was an Italian man who wrote a story about when he went to confession to St. Padre Pio. Of course, St. Padre Pio is not going to break the seal of confession. So this may have happened more than this guy, but this guy happened to tell people because he was so shocked by St. Padre Pio's reaction to him. He told him that he confessed to St. Padre Pio that he was angry at the Pope. I believe it was Pope John 23 at the time, for meeting with Khrushchev's son-in-law. So Khrushchev was the leader of communists, the Soviet Union, and communism is the antithesis to Catholicism. Catholic Church has always taught communism, and their redheaded stepchild socialism is evil. It's evil. We know this. But St. Padre Pio yelled at him and said, you never disrespect the Holy Father. The Holy Father deserves our obedience. And he threw the guy out of confession. St. Padre Pio was unjustly disciplined by the church. And for 12 years, he wasn't allowed to publicly celebrate Mass. And the people were so angry. They were protesting. You know, if there was a GoFundMe, they would have sent them millions of dollars back then. But instead, they were like just protesting. They were ready to tear down the church. And Padre Pio scolded them and said, you go home and you be obedient to your superiors. And in fact, when his bishop sent them a letter, showed him a letter from Rome and told him the bad news, the bishop said, St. Padre Pio's reaction was, the will of my superiors is the will of God. And he was obedient to the church. And he became a saint. Now contrast that with Father James Altman when he was disciplined. Whether justly or unjustly, you can choose for yourself. His reaction was to call the Pope an Antichrist, say we should stick a millstone around Pope Francis's neck and throw him into jail and send him straight to hell, because it would be better that we kill him and send him to hell than he leads other souls to hell. He started a GoFundMe and raised over $1 million in a month and bought himself this big, beautiful house with it. Big difference between the heretics and the saints. Big difference. So when I was a Protestant, I would say, oh, well, St. Paul might say the church is the pillar of truth. But he scolded the priest. He wasn't obedient to the Pope. You know, he told Peter to his face. That he was wrong because he didn't eat with the Gentiles. And I would say to my Protestant brothers and some Catholics who repeat this Protestant slander against the Pope, it actually proves my point. He knew St. Peter was teaching truth, that the Gentiles were equal to the Jews. And he was criticizing his friend that he knew face to face, because they were friends and they knew each other. He was criticizing his behavior because he knew he taught the truth. He's like, dude, you teach that all food is clean, yet you won't eat with the Gentiles? Stop being a hypocrite. So he didn't criticize his teaching, never said he taught heresy, never questioned his authority. He just criticized his behavior. Like, why? You teach that all food is clean and the Gentiles are our brothers, why won't you eat with them? So right now, a lot of people don't understand what Pope Leo's doing, certain things. And, you know, I'll remind you, I'm not going to go through everything. I'm not going to give all my arguments. I've made dozens of videos about this. But for Pope Francis's 12, 13 years when he was the Pope, you had anti-Catholic Catholics, I'll call them, because all that they're repeating is the anti-Catholic Protestants. So they're just repeating their lines, acting like it's something new. Criticizing Pope Francis, oh, he's going to ordain women, when in fact he updated canon law, I believe it's like 1379, to say if you ordain women, you're excommunicated, the bishop's excommunicated, and the woman's excommunicated. Oh, he thinks homosexuality is okay. He actually said point blank homosexuality is a sin on national television, and said the church cannot bless same-sex unions because God cannot bless sin. They said, oh, he accepts transgenders. He actually ate lunch with transgenders. Well, yes, he did. Yes, he did. He ate lunch. He invited 1,000 homeless prostitutes, and among them were some transgenders, to lunch, to have an encounter with the Vicar of Christ, and maybe, by the grace of God, have an encounter with Christ. And he was called a friend of sinners for that. Well, he's in good company because Jesus ate and drank with sinners, and he was called a friend of sinners by the Pharisees. Yet, Pope Francis said, transgender ideology is demonic. Now, I'm not going to defend everything Pope Leo said today either, because this video will go on forever, and I just wanted to make a short video to just give you a few things to hold on to if you're feeling weak in the faith. But just remember that all these lies you heard about Pope Francis were lies. all the gaslighting, your head on fire for 12 years, where the church was actually growing. We know now statistics show us the church was exploding, especially with young people. All these lies, you know, many of us, not just me, many of us that were faithful to the Pope and faithful to the church, we were seeing it. We were evangelizing. We were bringing people in the church. We were seeing people's lives being changed. We were seeing addicts being freed from sin, from addictions. We were seeing homosexuals change their lifestyle. We were seeing this. Yeah, you know. But those who were just constantly criticizing, they just had so much anger and hate, they couldn't see it. They were blinded, you know. Ironically, where you get a lot of this dissent from is the SSPX. They'll say, oh, the Pope committed a sacrilege, when the reality is the SSPX masses, all their masses, according to the church, are illicit. And according to the church, the pillar of truth, all illicit masses are sacrilegious, or sacrilege. So I find that kind of ironic. And they'll say, well, we're just irregular. We're in communion with Rome. We believe the Pope's the Pope. We're not sedevacantists. It's just irregular. Well, I bought a regular underwear a couple months ago. And there's a big difference, trust me. So I just want to leave with this. If you're questioning Pope Leo, just think about it. Take a moment and think to yourself, what would Martin Luther do? What would St. Padre Pio do? And choose wisely. What would all these excommunicated heretics that started all these breakaway groups do? And what would St. Catherine of Siena do? You know, when she said the devil, if the devil became the Pope, you would have to trust him. She could say that because she knew that would not happen. It may seem to us that the Pope is the devil. She wasn't, you know, because Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. So if you want to feel the peace of God, you want to feel the joy of the Lord, you want to win souls and bring them home, you want to bring your children back to the Catholic Church, the last thing you want to do is criticize the Pope. The last thing you want to do is dissent from the Pope. Trust me, I was a Protestant for 30 years. And if I heard all these Catholics on YouTube bashing the Pope every day, some of them make so much money on their videos. Every day, all they're doing is just criticizing the Pope. And nobody knows all the details. You don't know what you don't know, you know? So, God bless and stay Catholic.